The morning sun rose slowly over the red hills of New Mexico, spreading a warm glow across the desert. The sky looked endless, painted in soft pink and orange colors that touched every rock and bush. The land was quiet except for the soft cry of a hawk circling high above, and the gentle whisper of the wind through dry grass. Far from the nearest town, deep in the land her people had known for generations, a young Apache girl named Nita was walking along a narrow ridge. She was small and light-footed, moving carefully over the rocky path. Her dark hair was tied with a simple leather cord, and she carried a small basket woven from yucca fibers. Inside it were herbs and wildflowers she had gathered for her grandmother, who was the healer of their camp. Nita loved mornings like this, quiet, wide, and full of color. She liked to watch the desert wake up, to see the sunlight crawl across the ridges and make the stones glow red and gold. It was a world that belonged to her people. Every ridge, every cactus, every whisper of the wind carried the stories of her ancestors. Her grandmother often told her that the desert spoke to those who listened. The breeze carried the voice of old spirits, and the stones remembered everything that had ever happened upon them. Nita believed it. She felt safe and connected when she was out there, gathering herbs under the open sky. But the ridge that morning was dry and crumbly after weeks without rain. Loose sand shifted under her feet as she climbed higher, reaching toward a patch of green where a plant with silver leaves grew out of the rocks. Her grandmother called it moonleaf, a healing herb for fevers and burns. It only grew near cliffs, and Nita was proud to have found some. She bent down to pick a few leaves, careful not to pull the roots, humming softly to herself. A little lizard darted by her foot and disappeared between the stones. She smiled. Everything felt peaceful. Then the wind rose, not strong but sudden enough to lift a few strands of her hair and scatter the fine dust around her. She took a step back, meaning to find a steadier spot, and that was when her foot slipped on a piece of loose rock. For a moment, the world tilted. She gasped, reaching for the nearest bush, but the branch broke off in her hand. Her basket flew from her arm, spilling herbs across the slope. The ridge gave way under her feet and she tumbled down the rocky side. The fall was not long, but it was rough. Stones rolled and dust filled the air. She tried to stop herself, grabbing at the earth until finally she landed on a narrow ledge below. For a while she just lay there, not moving. Her heart pounded in her chest. The air felt hot and dry and her head throbbed. When she tried to sit up, a sharp pain ran through her ankle. She winced and fell back against the rock. Above her, the ridge looked impossibly high now. The spot where she had been standing seemed far away. She could see her basket lying on the slope above, too far to reach. The wind was still blowing softly, and in that sound, she thought she could hear the echo of her grandmother's voice, reminding her to be careful near cliffs. Nita looked around. The ledge she was on was narrow, barely wide enough to sit. Below it, the land dropped steeply into a dry canyon. She was trapped between the high ridge above and the deep drop below. She tried calling out, but her voice came out small and thin against the vast silence of the desert. There was no answer, only the echo of her own voice. The sun climbed higher. Its warmth became heat, and the heat soon turned harsh. Nita shaded her eyes and waited, hoping someone from her camp might come searching. But her people were miles away, across the hills, and they wouldn't know she had gone out so early. Hours passed. The rocks grew hot to the touch. Her lips began to dry and the pain in her ankle grew worse. She tore a strip from her dress and wrapped it around the swelling, remembering how her grandmother had taught her to do so. Then she leaned back against the ridge wall, trying to rest. As she sat there, she watched the land below, wide stretches of red earth, dotted with sage and cactus. A hawk circled again, its shadow gliding silently over the ground. Somewhere far away she could see a trail of dust, maybe from a rider or a small herd of cattle, but it was too far to tell. The hours moved slowly. The sun drifted west and the light softened. The colors changed again, turning the land golden. The air began to cool and the first long shadows crept across the rocks. Nita began to whisper softly to herself, old songs her grandmother used to sing when she was afraid of storms. The melody comforted her. It made her feel less alone. She told herself that her people always found their way home, that the spirits of the land never left their children behind. Yet deep inside, she could not help feeling a little afraid. The desert could be kind, but it could also be cruel to those who were lost. She thought of her mother's face, her father's laughter, and how worried they would be when the sun set and she did not return. She looked again toward the far horizon. The light was fading fast now, turning from gold to deep red. The rider she thought she'd seen earlier was gone. The only sound was the wind brushing past the rocks. Nita tried to stay awake, afraid that if she slept she might miss her chance to be found. But her eyelids grew heavy. The warmth of the rock beneath her was the only comfort she had. Before long, she closed her eyes, whispering one last prayer to the Great Spirit, asking for guidance or for someone to find her. Far away, the desert stretched on in every direction, endless and quiet. A coyote howled in the distance, and then all was still again. The stars began to appear one by one, small and bright against the deep blue of evening. Down on the ledge, Nita stirred, half dreaming, half awake. She thought she heard something, a faint rhythm that didn't belong to the wind or the desert night. It was distant, steady, like hooves striking the earth. At first she thought it was her imagination, but then she heard it again, faint but clear this time, growing closer. The sound of a horse moving through the canyon below. She lifted her head weakly, eyes searching the fading light. A shadow moved far below, a rider dark against the glowing sand. The cowboy Caleb Turner was returning from the lower pastures where his cattle grazed. He didn't know yet that a life waited to be saved just above him on the ridge. The last of the daylight caught on Nita's basket, still lying halfway down the slope, its silver leaves of moonleaf catching the sun. The glint caught Caleb's eye. He slowed his horse, puzzled. Out here in such lonely country there was rarely a sign of anyone else. He looked up toward the ridge, eyes narrowing. For a brief second he thought he saw movement, a small figure against the rocks. Nita, summoning the last of her strength, raised her arm, trying to wave. The cowboy sat straighter in his saddle, watching. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. The desert had a way of bringing strangers together, of weaving their paths for reasons no one could understand at the time. But that night, under the fading glow of the sunset, something began. A meeting that would change two lives and bridge two worlds. The ridge stood silent again as the stars brightened overhead. The wind carried the scent of sage and the soft creak of saddle leather as the cowboy turned his horse toward the slope. Nita's eyes fluttered closed, trusting, hoping, waiting for the sound of hoofbeats to come closer. The sun had already slipped low over the horizon when Caleb Turner guided his horse along the narrow trail that wound through the canyons. He was a quiet man, used to long days and lonely rides. The land stretched around him, wide, open, and empty, painted gold and copper by the last light of day. He liked this hour, when the desert seemed to breathe softly, cooling after the heat. Caleb had been herding cattle since sunrise. His hat was dusty, his shirt stained with sweat, and his horse moved with a slow, steady rhythm. He was heading back toward his small ranch before nightfall. The trail was one he knew well, one he could ride even in darkness. But that evening something caught his attention, a faint sparkle on the ridge high above. It flashed once, then faded. He slowed his horse, squinting into the light. Out here, far from any town, there shouldn't have been anything that shined like that. He tilted his head, studying the ridge. Then he saw it again, a small glint like sunlight bouncing off metal or glass. Caleb frowned. Maybe it was a bit of broken rock or something left behind by travelers, but something in his gut told him it wasn't that simple. He had lived on this land long enough to listen when the desert whispered. He clicked his tongue softly, and his horse, a chestnut gelding named Dusty, stopped and lifted its head. The cowboy scanned the slope again, eyes tracing the line of the ridge. Then he saw movement, the slightest shift of color against the rocks. His heart gave a quick beat. Someone was up there. Caleb wasn't a man who ignored his instincts. He turned Dusty toward the slope and began the slow climb. The horse moved carefully, hooves crunching on loose stone. The ridge was steep, and the air still held the heat of the day. Halfway up, he stopped again and called out, "Hello up there. You all right?" His voice echoed faintly against the rocks. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, so soft he almost missed it, came a sound. It wasn't a word, more like a weak cry. He felt a chill run through him. Someone was hurt. "Hold on, I'm coming," he called, urging Dusty higher. The slope was rough, too steep for the horse after a point, so Caleb dismounted. He tied the reins around a sturdy bush and began climbing on foot. Loose gravel slid under his boots, and the sun's last rays painted his path in orange and pink. As he neared the top, he saw her, a small figure lying against the rocks. She looked so still that for a moment his heart stopped. Then he saw her chest rise slightly as she breathed. He hurried to her side, kneeling carefully. "Hey now," he said softly, his voice steady and kind. "You're gonna be all right. I'm here." The girl opened her eyes slowly. They were dark and wide, filled with confusion and pain. For a second she looked scared, as if she didn't know who he was or what he wanted. "It's okay," he said again gently. "You're safe now." Her lips moved, but no words came out. Her throat was dry from hours in the sun. Caleb looked around and saw her small basket a few feet away, herbs scattered all over the rocks. He picked it up, brushing off the dust. "You've been out here a while, haven't you?" he murmured. The girl blinked once, weakly nodding. He could see that her ankle was swollen and her skin was flushed from the heat. She must have fallen, he thought. She was lucky to be alive. Caleb reached for his canteen and opened it. "Here," he said, holding it out carefully. "Take a little sip. Not too much at once." She hesitated, then took a small drink, the cool water touching her cracked lips. He saw the relief on her face as she swallowed. "That's better," he said with a small smile. "You're tough. You held on." She looked at him for a moment longer, studying his weathered face, his light brown hair, the concern in his eyes. Then she closed her eyes again, too tired to speak. Caleb looked at the sun sinking below the horizon. Night would fall soon, and it wasn't safe to stay up there in the dark. He had to get her down to the canyon floor before the light was gone. "Don't you worry," he whispered. "I'll get you out of here." He gently lifted her in his arms. She was light, but he moved slowly, careful not to jar her injured leg. She stirred a little, but didn't resist. Step by step, he carried her down the slope. Dusty waited patiently below, snorting softly when he saw them. "Easy, boy," Caleb said as he approached. "We've got company." He wrapped his duster coat around the girl to protect her from the cool wind that had begun to rise. Then, with practiced ease, he lifted her onto his horse, settling her against the saddle horn. He climbed up behind her, holding her steady. "Let's get you home," he said softly, and nudged Dusty forward. They moved slowly through the fading light, the horse's hooves making soft thuds against the sandy path. The air grew cooler and the stars began to appear. The girl rested her head against his shoulder, half conscious, her dark hair brushing his sleeve. Caleb didn't speak much, he never did. But inside, his thoughts were turning. Who was she? How had she ended up alone on that ridge? From her clothing and the patterns on her basket, he guessed she was Apache. Their camps weren't far from his ranch, though they rarely crossed paths. He knew some folks around town who would have turned away, saying it wasn't their concern. But Caleb wasn't made that way. His mother had raised him to help when he could, to see people as people, not strangers. The ride was long. The desert night came alive around them, the soft hoot of an owl, the rustle of a small animal in the brush, the gentle hum of crickets. The moon rose, lighting their path in silver. At one point, the girl stirred and whispered something in her own language. Caleb didn't understand, but the sound of her voice made him smile. "You'll be all right," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. Finally, after what felt like hours, he saw the faint outline of his ranch in the moonlight. A small house, a barn, and the corral beside a cottonwood tree. Smoke from the evening fire still lingered faintly in the air. When they reached the yard, Caleb stopped his horse and dismounted carefully. Then he lifted the girl again, holding her close so she wouldn't feel the cold night air. His old dog Buck came trotting from the porch, tail wagging, but Caleb raised a hand. "Easy now, Buck," he said softly. "We've got a guest." Inside the small house, the light from a lantern glowed warm and gentle. Caleb laid the girl on the cot near the fireplace. He covered her with a wool blanket and knelt beside her, checking her ankle again. It was swollen but not broken. He took a clean cloth, dipped it in cool water, and wrapped it carefully around the injury. She winced slightly but didn't cry out. "There you go," he said softly. "We'll get you fixed up. You just rest." He went to the kitchen corner, poured a little more water, and brought it back to her. She drank slowly, eyes fluttering open just enough to look at him again. "You're safe," he told her. "I'm Caleb. This here's my ranch. You can rest here till you're strong again." She nodded faintly. too tired to speak. He watched her for a moment, then pulled another blanket from the shelf and laid it over her. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees, and the sound of the crickets grew faint. Caleb sat down near the fire, removing his hat and setting it on the table. His eyes drifted to the girl again. She was young, maybe 15 or 16. He wondered if her family was searching for her, worried, sick. "I'll find a way to get you home," he murmured. "You just hang on." The flames flickered, painting the walls in gold. The long day finally caught up with him, and his eyelids grew heavy. But before he slept, he glanced one last time at the girl. She was breathing steadily now, her face peaceful. Somehow he knew this moment and this chance meeting on the ridge wasn't just an accident. The desert had brought them together for a reason. He didn't know what that reason was yet, but he felt it deep inside. As he drifted toward sleep, the moonlight touched the edge of the blanket covering her, and the land outside grew quiet again. Two souls, one from the world of the open range, one from the spirit of the Apache desert, had crossed paths under the same sky. The next morning, golden sunlight filtered through the small window of Caleb Turner's cabin. Dust floated gently in the air, glowing like tiny stars in the warm light. The soft crackle of the fire was the only sound inside. The smell of wood smoke and coffee filled the quiet room. Nita stirred under the wool blanket, her eyelids fluttering open. For a few seconds, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was wooden, and the air smelled of leather, horses, and smoke, not the scent of her family's campfire. Then memory rushed back, the ridge, the fall, the pain, and the cowboy who had carried her away. She turned her head and saw him sitting at the small table, mending a piece of saddle leather. His hat rested beside him and his shirt sleeves were rolled up. The light from the window touched his face, showing the lines of sun and wind that had marked him through years of work outdoors. When he noticed her awake, he smiled gently. "Well, good morning," he said in a calm voice. "How's that ankle feeling today?" Nita blinked, still trying to find her words. Her ankle throbbed, but it was wrapped neatly with a cloth, cool and firm. She looked down at it, then back at him. "It hurts a little," she said softly. Her voice was quiet, careful. "That's to be expected," he said, nodding. "You took quite a tumble up there." He stood and poured some water into a tin cup, then handed it to her. "Here, take a drink. You were real dehydrated last night." She took the cup and sipped slowly, the cool water easing her dry throat. He waited patiently, leaning back in his chair. "My name's Caleb Turner," he said. "You're safe here, miss. This is my ranch. You can rest until you're strong enough to travel." She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "My name is Nita." "That's a pretty name," he said kindly. "You from the Apache camp over the ridge?" She nodded, clutching the blanket close. "Yes, my grandmother. She is a healer. I went to find herbs." Caleb nodded thoughtfully. "Ah, that makes sense. I saw the basket and those plants you had. You were working hard out there." Nita looked down, embarrassed. "I should not have gone alone." He chuckled softly. "Well, you're safe now." That's what matters. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the wind outside and the gentle snoring of Caleb's old dog, Buck, near the door. The warmth of the fire filled the room. After a few minutes, Caleb rose and went to the stove. "You hungry? I've got some porridge and honey." "Not much, but it'll do." Nita nodded shyly. "Thank you." He served her a small bowl and handed it over. She ate slowly, each bite soft and sweet. It had been more than a day since she'd had real food. Caleb watched to make sure she didn't rush. "You got folks who'll be missing you, I reckon," he said after a moment. "My grandmother, my father," she answered quietly. "They will be worried. I'll take you home soon as you're able to ride," he promised. "But we need that ankle to heal first." She nodded again, trusting his calm voice. He reminded her a little of her father, strong, gentle, and careful with his words. For the next few days, time passed slowly at the ranch. Each morning, Caleb went out early to check on his cattle and mend fences. When he returned, he always brought something, wildflowers to brighten the table or a few berries he'd found near the creek. He didn't say much, but his actions spoke for him. Nita spent her days resting, watching the world through the small window. She liked to see the horses grazing in the corral and the wide blue sky stretching endlessly beyond. Sometimes she would hum old songs her grandmother had taught her, and Caleb would pause in his work to listen quietly. One afternoon, As he was patching a saddle strap, she asked, "You live alone?" "Mostly," he said. "Got Buck here for company. Had some ranch hands once, but they moved on." "Don't you get lonely?" she asked softly. He looked out the window for a long moment. "Sometimes," he said. "But this land keeps me busy, and I've always liked the quiet." Nita smiled faintly. "I like the quiet too." From that day, they began to talk a little more. Caleb told her about his life on the ranch, how he'd come from Texas years ago, chasing a dream of owning land. He spoke of long winters, stubborn cattle, and the peace he found in the open air. Nita, in turn, shared small stories about her people, how her grandmother made medicine from the desert plants, how her little brother liked to chase lizards, and how their campfires filled the night with laughter and songs. Caleb listened with real interest, never interrupting. "Sounds like you've got a strong family," he said. "We are strong because we stay together," she said simply. He nodded. "That's the right way." Each evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, they would sit by the fire. Nita would watch Caleb feed the flames, the light flickering across his face. Sometimes he would hum softly, old cowboy tunes that drifted through the warm air. She didn't understand all the words, but the melodies felt kind, like the sound of home. One night, as the stars came out, she asked, "Why did you stop for me? You could have kept riding." He looked at her for a moment, then smiled. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "I couldn't just leave you out there." She nodded slowly. "My grandmother says good hearts see what others cannot." Caleb laughed softly. "Well, maybe I just got lucky." By the end of the week, Nita's ankle began to heal. She could stand for short moments, though Caleb insisted she rest more. He made a small crutch for her from a sturdy branch, smoothing it carefully so it wouldn't splinter. When he gave it to her, she smiled shyly and thanked him. As she walked slowly around the room, Caleb watched with quiet pride. "You're tougher than most folks I know," he said. Nita laughed softly. "My grandmother says I am stubborn," he grinned. "That too." As the days went by, an easy rhythm grew between them. She helped him with small things, sorting tools, cleaning the table, feeding Buck. In return, he taught her how to grind corn for bread and how to patch small tears in fabric. The land outside turned greener after a short rain. The smell of wet earth filled the air. Birds came back to the cottonwood tree, and wildflowers began to bloom along the fence line. One afternoon, as they sat outside watching the sky turn pink, Nita said, "Your land is very big." Caleb nodded. "Big, but sometimes too empty. It's quiet. Maybe too quiet. You like people, but you hide from them," she said softly. He looked surprised, then laughed. "You see straight through me, don't you?" She smiled. "You helped me. I see your heart." He didn't know what to say to that. The moment was quiet, filled with something gentle and unspoken. That night, as Nita sat by the fire while Caleb played softly on an old harmonica, she thought of how strange the world could be, how two people from such different paths could find peace under the same roof. She missed her family, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She felt safe. Caleb, sitting across from her, watched the flames dance in her dark eyes. He had seen many things in his life, storms, loneliness, miles of open land, but nothing had felt quite like this quiet companionship. He knew he would have to take her home soon, but part of him wished the days would stretch a little longer. Outside, the moon rose high over the desert, silvering the ridge where he had found her. The night wind carried the scent of sage and the faint sound of coyotes far away. Inside, the cabin glowed with the warmth of firelight and a bond that neither of them had expected. In that small, peaceful space, two lives were slowly changing, not with loud words or grand gestures, but through kindness, patience, and the simple comfort of being seen. And though neither of them knew it yet, the healing happening in that cabin went deeper than a hurt ankle. It was the start of healing something older, the distance between two worlds and the beginning of a friendship that would soon touch many hearts beyond their own. The days passed softly, one folding into another like pages in a quiet story. The desert around the ranch glowed with warm colors every morning, and in the evenings the sky turned deep blue, filled with stars so bright they looked close enough to touch. Nita's ankle had healed enough for her to walk without the crutch now. She moved carefully but with more confidence each day. She helped Caleb with small chores, fetching water, brushing the horses, or gathering wood for the fire. She liked being useful, and Caleb never treated her like a burden. He always said, "We make a good team, you and me." She smiled each time he said that. It made her feel strong again. But Caleb knew that she couldn't stay forever. Her people would be searching for her, and the longer she stayed, the more worried they would become. He often found himself looking toward the distant ridge where he had found her, wondering if a search party might be out there already. One afternoon, as they were tending the small garden behind the cabin, Nita asked quietly, "When can I go home?" Caleb wiped his hands on a cloth and looked at her kindly. "You're almost ready," he said. "Your leg's strong now. I was thinking we could ride out tomorrow morning if you're feeling up for it." She looked down for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of a leaf. "I want to see my family," she said softly. But, Caleb asked. She hesitated. "I will miss this place. It feels peaceful here." Caleb nodded slowly. "Yes, the land's got a quiet kind of peace, doesn't it? Grows on you after a while." Nita smiled faintly. "It feels like the wind talks here." He chuckled. "Maybe it does. Maybe it's got more to say than most people." That night, neither of them slept much. Nita sat by the fire, looking at the small woven basket Caleb had helped her repair. It reminded her of her grandmother's hands and the songs sung by the fire in her camp. Caleb, sitting across from her, mended a piece of rope, pretending not to notice that his heart felt heavier than usual. Morning came with soft light and cool air. Caleb saddled his horse, Dusty, and packed a small bag with food and water. Nita folded her blanket neatly and tied her basket to the saddle. Buck barked once as if to wish her good luck. Caleb mounted first, then helped her up behind him. "Hold on tight," he said with a gentle smile. "I remember," she replied, and they both laughed softly. They rode across the desert as the sun rose. The land stretched endlessly before them, dotted with sagebrush and tall red rocks. The rhythm of the horses' hooves echoed across the open plain. Nita watched the world around her with wide eyes. The same land she had known all her life, yet somehow it looked different now. After hours of riding, they reached the ridge. Caleb stopped the horse and looked toward the valley below. Smoke from small fires rose in the distance, signs of a camp. Nita's eyes brightened. "That's my home," she whispered. Caleb smiled. "Then we're almost there." They continued down the narrow trail until they reached a flat clearing. Before they could go farther, several figures appeared from between the rocks, men on horseback watching closely. Caleb slowed Dusty and raised a hand in peace. Nita sat up straighter. "They are from my tribe," she said quietly. One of the riders moved forward, his eyes sharp and cautious. He looked at Nita, then at Caleb. "Who are you?" he asked firmly. Before Caleb could speak, Nita said quickly, "It's all right. He helped me. He saved my life." The man's expression softened slightly but still held doubt. "You are sure, Nita?" "Yes," she said firmly. "He found me when I fell from the ridge. He took care of me." The rider nodded slowly and gestured for them to follow. As they approached the camp, several women came running, Nita's grandmother among them. The old woman's face broke into tears as she embraced her granddaughter tightly. Caleb turned away respectfully, giving them space. The reunion filled the air with soft voices and the warmth of relief. When Nita finally turned back to him, her eyes were wet with gratitude. "My family thanks you," she said. "My grandmother wants to speak with you." Caleb nodded, unsure what to expect. The old woman approached him slowly. Her hair was long and gray, braided neatly, and her eyes were deep with wisdom. She spoke gently, her voice steady. "You found my granddaughter and brought her home. For that, you have our thanks." Caleb removed his hat and bowed his head slightly. "I'm just glad she's safe, ma'am." The old woman studied him for a moment, then said, "Many hearts in this land carry old fears, but kindness is stronger when it walks in truth." Caleb didn't fully understand her words, but he nodded respectfully. "I only did what anyone should do." She smiled faintly. "Not everyone does what they should." Around them, some of the younger men watched Caleb with suspicion. The history between the settlers and the Apache was full of mistrust, and they couldn't understand why one of his kind had helped one of theirs. But the old woman's calm voice and Nita's clear loyalty made them stay silent. That evening, the tribe invited Caleb to share food with them. It was a simple meal of roasted corn and bread, but the gesture meant more than words. Caleb sat quietly near the fire, feeling the weight of many eyes on him. Nita sat nearby, her grandmother humming a soft song. For the first time, he felt what it meant to cross a bridge between two worlds. He didn't speak their language, and they didn't know his. But the firelight on their faces said enough. Gratitude, respect, and the beginning of something new. As the stars came out, Nita walked over and sat beside him. "You look uncomfortable," she said softly, smiling. He chuckled. "Just not used to all the attention." "They are grateful," she said. "They don't always show it, but they are." Caleb nodded. "That's good to know." He looked around the camp, the flickering flames reflecting in his eyes. "You belong here, Nita. This is where you're meant to be." She looked at him for a long moment. "I will never forget you," she said. "You gave me back my life," he smiled, his voice quiet. "You didn't need saving. You just needed a little help getting home." They both sat in silence for a while, listening to the crackle of the fire and the soft murmur of voices in the distance. When it was time for him to leave, Nita's grandmother gave him a small pouch made of deerskin. "For your journey," she said. "Inside are herbs, for healing, for peace, and for remembrance." Caleb accepted it with gratitude. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll take good care of it." As he mounted his horse, Nita stepped forward. "Caleb?" He turned. "Someday, if you come this way again," she said softly, "you will always be welcome here." He smiled. "I'll remember that." The moonlight glowed silver on the sand as he rode away. The sound of the horse's hooves faded into the night, leaving behind the soft hum of the campfire and the rhythm of a heart grateful and changed. Nita watched until he disappeared beyond the ridge. The wind brushed past her face, gentle and cool, as if carrying a whisper, the same wind that had first brought him to her. Back at his ranch, Caleb hung the small pouch near the fireplace. Whenever he looked at it, he thought of her, the brave girl from the ridge, and the people who had welcomed him despite the walls built by fear and history. He often found himself gazing toward the distant mountains, where the sky met the land in a line of shimmering gold. Something inside him had shifted, a quiet understanding that kindness could change more than a single life. It could change the way hearts saw one another, and somewhere beyond the ridge, under the same wide sky, Nita sat beside her grandmother, telling the story of the cowboy who listened to the desert's call, the one who brought her home when hope had nearly slipped away. The desert was silent, but not empty. It carried their story now, a story of trust, courage, and the gentle breaking of old barriers, told in every whisper of the wind that moved through the hills. Years passed, and the desert never stopped whispering stories. The wind still sang across the ridges, carrying memories of the day a young Apache girl fell and a cowboy rode into her life. The land changed with the seasons, green after rain, gold in the summer, soft gray in winter, but some stories never faded. They became part of the land itself. Nita grew into a woman, graceful and strong. Her people often came to her for help, for healing, or for comfort when their hearts were heavy. The herbs she once gathered as a child became her tools of care, and her gentle voice became a source of calm. Her grandmother, proud but aging, passed down her knowledge of healing and prayer. When she finally grew too old to walk the hills, Nita carried the basket herself, collecting plants under the same wide sky. She always felt the wind around her, the same wind that had called to Caleb Turner years before. Sometimes she would pause on the ridge and look out across the desert, wondering if he still rode those distant trails. In her heart, she knew he did. Far away on the other side of the hills, Caleb's ranch had grown quiet. Time had left silver in his hair, but his strength and calm spirit had not changed. He still rose before sunrise, still tended his horses, and still mended his fences with care. But life felt different now. He often thought of that day. The glint of light on the ridge, the small voice calling faintly, the courage in that young girl's eyes. It had been many years, yet the memory remained bright, like a photograph framed by sunlight. The small deerskin pouch still hung by his fireplace. Sometimes he took it down and held it gently in his rough hands. The herbs inside had long dried, but their scent still lingered faintly, reminding him of her people, of kindness, gratitude, and the bond that had formed without words. He had never told anyone the full story. Folks in town had heard only bits and pieces. Caleb Turner helped some Apache girl once, they'd say, but to him, It wasn't just a story about saving someone. It was about what saving someone had done to him. He had learned that goodness could cross any line, that humanity lived beyond the fences people built. One spring morning, Caleb decided to ride farther than he had in years. The air was cool and the land smelled fresh after a rare rain. He saddled Dusty, now gray around the mane, and headed toward the ridge, the same place where it had all begun. The climb was slower now. His hands were steady, but age had given him a patience that wasn't there before. When he reached the top, he stopped to look around. The view spread wide and endless, the desert glowing under the sun, the sky so blue it felt like forever. He took off his hat, letting the breeze touch his hair. He closed his eyes and listened. The wind moved softly through the sagebrush, carrying familiar sounds, whispers, distant echoes, the hum of the world itself. He smiled. "You still talk to me, don't you?" he said quietly, as if the land could hear him. Far below, on the other side of the valley, Nita walked among the herbs with her basket. The years had touched her lightly. Her hair was longer, her movement sure and graceful. Children followed her sometimes, watching how she knew the name of every plant and what each one could heal. They called her the healer of the wind, because she always said the wind told her where to go. That morning, as she climbed the ridge, something made her stop. The breeze shifted, carrying the sound of hoofbeats. It was faint but steady, like a heartbeat in the distance. She turned and looked toward the horizon. At first, she saw only sunlight on the rocks. Then slowly a rider appeared, moving carefully, steadily, just as before. Her heart gave a small, quick beat. It couldn't be, not after so many years. But as he came closer, she saw the shape of his hat, the way he sat tall in the saddle, calm and steady as the earth itself. Her breath caught. It was him. When Caleb saw her standing near the ridge, basket in hand, he almost didn't believe his own eyes. The years between them seemed to melt away like mist. He stopped his horse a few feet away and smiled. "Well now," he said softly, his voice warm with wonder. "Didn't expect to find you up here again." Nita smiled, her eyes bright. "The ridge remembers us," she said. "The wind told me to come." Caleb laughed gently. "Guess the wind's smarter than I am." They stood there for a while, neither rushing to fill the silence. The land around them seemed to glow with quiet joy, as if it too was part of their reunion. Nita gestured toward the valley. "Come," she said. "You will eat with us." Caleb hesitated only a moment, then nodded. "I'd like that." When they reached her village, the people welcomed him with respect. Many still remembered the story their elders had told, the cowboy who had once carried a lost girl home from the cliffs. To them, he was not a stranger, but a living part of their story. That evening, as the fire burned and the stars appeared, they all gathered to share food and songs. Children sat near Nita, listening as she told the story again, the same one her grandmother had once told, now passed to a new generation. She spoke simply, her voice steady. "A long time ago, when I was a girl, I fell from the ridge and could not find my way home. The desert sent someone to help me, a man from far away who did not know me but had a kind heart. He carried me across the land and kept me safe. He showed that the world can be big, but hearts can still meet." Caleb sat quietly by the fire, listening. The flames reflected in his eyes, and for the first time in many years, he felt completely at peace. When the songs ended, Nita brought him a cup of warm tea made from herbs she had gathered that morning. "Do you remember this scent?" she asked. He breathed it in and smiled. "Moonleaf," he said softly. "The same one I found scattered on the ridge." She nodded. "Yes, the same. The ridge still grows it every spring." They sat together under the stars, speaking softly of old memories and the passing of time. The night air was cool, carrying the sounds of laughter and gentle music from the campfire. Caleb looked around and said quietly, "You built something beautiful here, Nita." She smiled. "You helped me begin. You showed me what kindness can do." He looked at her with deep respect. "No," he said. "You did all this yourself. I just happened to be passing by." Nita shook her head. "Sometimes passing by is what changes everything." They both smiled, and for a long moment the world seemed perfectly still. The fire crackled softly, the stars shimmered, and the desert stretched endlessly around them, vast, peaceful, and full of life. Later, as the night grew late and most of the camp had fallen asleep, Nita stood by the ridge once more, looking out at the dark land below. Caleb came to stand beside her, the moonlight soft on his face. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "Yes," she whispered. "It always was," he nodded. "I think the desert keeps its promises." She turned to him. "And what promise is that?" He smiled. "That good hearts always find each other again, no matter how far apart they wander." Nita looked up at the stars and felt tears rise softly in her eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude. "Then I believe the desert has kept that promise tonight," she said. The two of them stood together side by side, the past and present woven gently around them. The wind moved through the canyon below, carrying the scent of sage and the faint hum of old memories. And somewhere, deep within that timeless desert, their story became part of the land, a tale whispered in every breeze, sung in every shifting dune. It was not just a story about a fall or a rescue. It was about compassion, courage, and how one small act of kindness could ripple through time, healing hearts and bridging worlds. Long after both of them had gone, the people still told the story of Nita, the healer of the wind, and Caleb Turner, the cowboy who listened to the desert. And whenever the evening wind passed through the ridges, it carried their story, gentle, eternal, and full of hope, reminding everyone that sometimes the quietest acts of goodness are the ones that last forever.